in the quiet suburban streets of Cottage City, Maryland, a disturbing darkness began to take root inside a seemingly ordinary home during the winter of 1949. The family who lived there found their peaceful existence shattered by an invisible force that defied all rational explanation and scientific understanding. This was not merely a case of creaking floorboards or settling foundations, but rather a malevolent intelligence that seemed to target a young boy. The air inside the house grew heavy with an oppressive weight that made breathing difficult for anyone who dared to step across the threshold. Shadows appeared to lengthen and twist of their own accord in the corners of the room. It was a time when the world was looking toward a bright future. But this household was being dragged back into a primal darkness. The events that transpired within these walls would go on to inspire one of the most terrifying films in cinematic history. Yet the true story remains far more unsettling than any fiction. While Hollywood relies on special effects and dramatic music, the reality of what happened to the boy known by the pseudonym Roland Doe involved a visceral and intimate violation of the human spirit. The terror did not happen all at once, but rather crept in slowly like a cold draft through a cracked window pane. It started with subtle signs that the family initially tried to dismiss as imagination or simple coincidence. However, as the days turned into weeks, the phenomena escalated into a relentless assault on their sanity and their safety. Central to this harrowing tale was the relationship between the young boy and his Aunt Harriet, who was a figure of great influence in his early life. She was a woman who held a deep fascination with the spiritual world and the possibility of communicating with those who had passed beyond the veil of death. It was Aunt Harriet who introduced the boy to the use of a Ouija board, which was often seen as a harmless parlor game during that era. They spent hours together, with their fingers resting lightly on the planchette, watching it glide across the letters and numbers. The boy was an only child and found a sense of connection and excitement in these sessions, believing he was speaking to friendly spirits. The atmosphere shifted tragically when Aunt Harriet passed away in St. Louis, leaving the boy grief-stricken and isolated in his sorrow. Desperate to maintain the connection with his beloved aunt, the boy continued to use the Ouija board alone in his room. He called out into the void, hoping for a familiar response. But he unwittingly opened a door that should have remained shut forever. It was shortly after her death that the strange occurrences began to manifest within the house. The family initially heard sounds that resembled the scratching of claws against the wooden floorboards and the walls. The noise was rhythmic and persistent, echoing through the hallway at night, like a trapped animal trying to escape. At first, the parents searched the house for rats or mice, believing that a pest infestation was the cause of the disturbance. They called in exterminators, who pulled up floorboards and checked behind the walls, but found absolutely no trace of any living creature. The scratching sounds grew louder and more distinct, eventually migrating to the bedroom where the boy slept. The terrifying realization struck the family when they noticed the scratching seemed to respond to their presence. If they knocked on the wall 3 times, the scratching would answer with 3 distinct raps. The intelligence behind the noise was mocking them, establishing a communication that sent chills down their spines. The horror escalated rapidly from auditory disturbances to physical manifestations that defied the laws of physics. Items in the house began to move of their own volition, with vases sliding off mantels and chairs scraping across the floor when no one was near them. The most terrifying activity centered on the boy himself as he lay in his bed at night. His mattress would begin to shake violently, causing him to be thrown onto the floor while he screamed in terror. The family watched in helpless horror as the heavy furniture in his room glided across the floor as if pushed by invisible hands. They tried to hold the boy down, but the force shaking the bed was too powerful for them to control. Desperate for answers and fearing for the sanity of their son, the family turned to their Lutheran pastor for spiritual guidance. The pastor arranged for the boy to stay at his own home for a night, hoping that a change of environment would cease the disturbances. However, the entity seemed attached to the boy rather than the house. During the night, the pastor witnessed the boy being thrown from his bed and heard the same scratching noises that had plagued the family home. Realizing that he was dealing with forces beyond his comprehension and theological training, the pastor advised the family to seek the assistance of a Catholic priest. He believed that the ancient rites of the Catholic Church were necessary to combat this evil. The family eventually reached out to the Catholic community, and the case was brought to the attention of Father Albert Hughes. Father Hughes was a man of deep faith who approached the situation with a mix of skepticism and concern. He visited the home and witnessed the phenomena firsthand, seeing the boy speak in a guttural voice that was not his own. The priest attempted to perform an exorcism at Georgetown University Hospital, but the ritual was cut short violently. The boy managed to break free from his restraints and fashioned a weapon from a bed spring, slashing the arm of the priest. The attack was so severe that the exorcism had to be halted, immediately leaving the family in despair. Following the failed attempt and the injury to Father Hughes, the terrified family decided to leave Maryland and travel to St. Louis, Missouri. They hoped that staying with relatives in the city where Aunt Harriet had lived might bring them some peace or closure. They did not know that they were bringing the demon with them, and that the battle for the soul of the boy was only just beginning. In St. Louis, the phenomena intensified with objects flying across rooms. and the boy entering trance-like states where he would display strength far beyond his years. The scratches on his body became more defined, often appearing as words or symbols carved into his flesh by invisible claws. In St. Louis, the case was taken up by the Jesuits at St. Louis University, including Father William Bowdern and Father Walter Halloran. Father Bowdern was the pastor of the college church and was tasked by the Archbishop to perform the solemn rite of exorcism. He was a man of steely determination who understood the gravity of the spiritual warfare he was about to undertake. Father Halloran was a younger priest asked to assist, and he would later provide the most detailed accounts of the events. The priests knew they were facing a formidable adversary that would test their faith and their physical endurance to the breaking point. The exorcisms began in the residence of the relatives, where the boy was staying on Roanoke Drive. The atmosphere in the room during the rituals was described as intensely cold, with the temperature dropping. Significantly, despite the heating being turned on, the boy would thrash violently on the bed, requiring multiple grown men to hold him down. Father Bowdern recited the prayers of the Roman ritual commands that had been used for centuries to expel demons. The entity inside the boy reacted with rage spitting and cursing at the priests in languages the boy had never studied, such as Latin and guttural sounds that resembled no known human tongue. One of the most chilling aspects of the possession was the appearance of red welts and scratches on the chest and stomach of the boy. These were not random marks, but often formed clear letters and words. Witnesses, including the priests and family members, watched in awe as the word hell appeared in angry red lines on his skin. On another occasion, an image that looked like the face of a devil was etched onto his leg. These markings would appear spontaneously and then fade away, leaving the skin irritated but unbroken. It was a direct message from the entity claiming ownership over the body of the child. The nights were long and exhausting for everyone involved, as the exorcisms would often last for hours until dawn. The boy would contort his body into unnatural positions, and his face would twist into a mask of hatred. Father Halloran often had to use all his strength to restrain the boy, who would attempt to strike and bite anyone within reach. The entity seemed to know the deepest secrets and sins of those in the room, taunting the priests with personal information they had never shared. This psychological warfare was designed to break their resolve and make them doubt their own worthiness to perform the rite. As the weeks dragged on, the physical toll on the priests was immense, with Father Bowdern fasting and praying incessantly. The entity showed no signs of weakening, and the manifestations grew more violent. A bottle of holy water flew across the room and smashed against the wall without anyone touching it. The bed would rise off the floor and bang loudly, creating a cacophony that terrified the neighbors. The family lived in a state of constant fear, unable to sleep or find respite from the entity that had invaded their lives. They prayed the rosary, constantly hoping that the intercession of the Virgin Mary would aid the priests. Due to the increasing violence and the need for a more controlled environment, the decision was made to move the boy to the Alexian Brothers Hospital in St. Louis. He was admitted to the psychiatric wing, where the priests could perform the rituals with more privacy and security. The hospital staff were sworn to secrecy, but many witnessed the strange occurrences. The room where the boy stayed became a battleground between good and evil. The sounds of the exorcism echoed through the corridors, chilling the blood of the nurses and doctors who worked the night shift. In the sterile environment of the hospital, the supernatural events continued unabated. The boy would sometimes vomit copious amounts of liquid that smelled vile and unnatural. He would speak in a voice that sounded like several people talking at once, a chorus of the damned emanating from a single throat. The priests were relentless in their prayers, reciting the litany of the saints and commanding the demon to reveal its name. The entity was evasive and arrogant, often laughing maniacally at their attempts to cast it out. It claimed to be the devil himself and boasted that it would never leave the boy. Father Bowdern remained steadfast, refusing to give up on the child, despite the lack of progress. He believed that the demon was wearing the boy down, attempting to drive him to despair or death. The priest placed religious relics on the body of the boy, including a relic of Saint Domitilla and a crucifix. The demon reacted violently to these holy objects, causing the boy to scream in pain, as if he were being burned. The spiritual battle was a test of endurance, and Father Bowdern knew that he had to outlast the evil presence through the power of faith and the authority of the Church. The turning point of the exorcism occurred during the Holy Week of Easter in 1949. The timing was symbolic, as the Church celebrated the suffering death and resurrection of Christ. The atmosphere in the hospital room was charged with a palpable tension, as the priests sensed that the climax was approaching. The boy was in a state of extreme agitation, his body rigid, and his eyes rolled back in his head. The entity seemed desperate, lashing out with renewed fury, as if it knew its time was running out. The prayers continued through the night, with the priests chanting the words of liberation. On the night of Easter Monday, the conflict reached its absolute peak. The boy was writhing on the bed, shouting defiance at the priests and the Archangel Michael. Father Bowdern demanded that the demon identify itself and depart in the name of Jesus Christ. Suddenly, a loud booming voice that did not belong to the boy filled the room. The voice identified itself as Satan and declared that it would not leave. However, another presence seemed to enter the room, a force of light and authority that challenged the darkness. The priests felt a shift in the atmosphere, a sense of power that overwhelmed the evil. According to the witnesses, the boy suddenly went rigid, and a clear, commanding voice spoke through him, saying, "Satan, I am Saint Michael, and I command you to leave this body now." The declaration was followed by a sound like a thunderclap or a sonic boom that shook the entire hospital wing. The nurses and staff in other parts of the building reported seeing a brilliant light flashing in the room or hearing the explosive sound. The boy went limp on the bed, his breathing shallow and his body exhausted. The violent thrashing and the guttural voices ceased instantly, leaving a profound silence in the room. When the boy awoke, he had no memory of the final confrontation or the voice of Saint Michael. He looked around the room with clear eyes, appearing to be his normal self for the first time in months. The red scratches and welts on his body began to fade rapidly, leaving no scars. The oppressive feeling of evil that had permeated the air was gone, replaced by a sense of peace. The priests were exhausted, but filled with gratitude, knowing that the long nightmare was finally over. They offered prayers of thanksgiving and prepared to return the boy to his family. The Jesuits and the Alexian brothers took great care to protect the identity of the boy and his family. They used the pseudonym Roland Doe or Robbie Mannheim in all official records and discussions. The diary kept by Father Bishop, another priest, who assisted, provided the primary source material for the case. But it was kept under lock and key for many years. The church wanted to avoid a media circus and allow the boy to grow up and live a normal life without the stigma of possession. The family returned to Maryland, and the boy grew into a man who reportedly had no recollection of the terrifying events. The story of the exorcism eventually leaked to the public through a brief article in the Washington Post, which caught the attention of a student named William Peter Blatty at Georgetown University. Blatty was fascinated by the account and spent years researching the case, eventually writing the novel The Exorcist, while the book and the subsequent film dramatized the events, adding green vomit and spinning heads. The core of the story remained true to the reports of the priests. The reality was less theatrical, but far more psychologically disturbing, focusing on the violation of the self and the cold endurance of faith. Decades have passed since those dark winter nights in 1949. Yet the case remains one of the most well-documented exorcisms in the history of the United States. Skeptics have offered alternative explanations ranging from mental illness to elaborate pranks by a troubled teenager. They point to the lack of photographic evidence and the reliance on witness testimony. However, the priests involved were educated men, psychiatrists, and academics who initially sought natural explanations. They were convinced that what they witnessed was genuinely preternatural and beyond the scope of medical science. The house in Cottage City, where it all began, no longer stands, having been demolished years ago. The empty lot remains a silent witness to the terror that once unfolded there. In St. Louis, the room in the Alexian Brothers Hospital was boarded up, and eventually the wing was torn down to make way for new construction. It is as if the physical locations tried to erase the memory of the evil that had dwelt within them. Yet the records remain in the archives of the Archdiocese, and the diaries of the priests tell a story that cannot be easily dismissed. The priests who participated in the exorcism rarely spoke of it, publicly honoring their vow to protect the privacy of the family. Father Halloran, in his later years, gave a few interviews where he maintained that the boy was afflicted by something he could not explain. He described the coldness, the moving objects, and the sheer hatred that emanated from the child. He did not seek fame or recognition, but simply bore witness to the battle he had fought. His testimony adds a layer of credibility to the account that continues to unsettle researchers. The boy himself lived a long life, passing away in 2020 without ever seeking to capitalize on his notoriety. He married, had children, and worked a government job, completely detaching himself from the horror of his youth. Perhaps his mind protected him by burying the memories deep in his subconscious. Or perhaps the exorcism was truly a complete cleansing that left no trace of the demon. His silence is perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the aftermath, suggesting a desire to leave the darkness firmly in the past. The case of the possessed boy of Maryland serves as a chilling reminder of the mysteries that lie at the edge of human understanding. It challenges our modern reliance on science and logic, suggesting that there are forces in the universe that operate by different rules. The story taps into our primal fear of the unknown and the idea that our homes and our bodies are not as secure as we believe. It forces us to confront the possibility that evil is not just an abstract concept, but a real and active presence. Even today, researchers and paranormal enthusiasts continue to debate the details of the case, analyzing the diaries and the timelines. New theories emerge and old arguments are revisited, but the core mystery remains unsolved. Was it a manifestation of telekinesis, a severe psychological episode, or a genuine intrusion of the demonic into our world? The answer lies buried with the men who stood in that cold room, holding crucifixes against the dark. As night falls over the suburbs of Maryland, and the wind whistles through the trees, one cannot help but wonder if the door that was opened in 1949 was truly shut. The story of Roland Doe lingers in the cultural consciousness, a shadow that refuses to fade. It is a testament to the fragility of our reality and the enduring power of faith against the encroaching dark. The whispers of that forgotten exorcism continue to echo, warning us that some things are best left undisturbed in the silence of the night.